Hi guys, it's Debbie and we're back with a new What I Watched This Month this video in which I cover all the films, series, documentaries I've been watching recently, and as always I love to hear what you've been watching, what you loved, what you hated, so make sure to leave a comment down below. This month has been pretty packed for me. I've crossed many films off my watch list, so unfortunately I won't have too much time for every title, but it was also the month in which I watched a surprisingly high amount of big new blockbusters. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest films of the month, if not one of the biggest of the whole year, has to be Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I really like the first chapter of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, but I wasn't particularly attracted to this sequel, mostly because the plot description sounded exactly like the first film all over, but with cooler animation. So I didn't know what to expect, but when the first raving reviews started pouring in, I had to check it out. And I'm so pleased I watched it on the big screen. The animators sure did animate. They basically took all the super engaging and creative animation from the first film and cranked it up. It was an absolute feast for the eyes. Story-wise, I think we can all agree that the new characters are cool and interesting, but it doesn't really take huge steps from the first chapter, and it feels more like a massive setup for the third and final film. Again, we have Miles dealing with trying to not let his family down while exploring the Spider-Man multiverse, and with the bar set this high, who knows how the third film will be. Another huge film I watched this month was The Flash. Now, you all know I'm more of a DC girl, and I'm also a fan of Ezra Miller as an actor. In this film, he reprises his role of the Flash, a funny, quirky superhero who we already saw in Justice League and other related projects. I guess this film is okay. The CGI is absolutely atrocious for the film's budget. Some of the lines were pretty cringeworthy, but overall it's a fun summer movie. I don't think anybody walked into a cinema expecting this to be on a Dark Knight to superhero film level. My whole theatre was laughing and cheering. There is a lot of comedy as the Flash has a particularly humorous personality, and who knows what will happen next, as director Andy Muschietti said that if there is a sequel, he wants Ezra Miller in it. Now let's talk about a very bad title. The cherry on the top doesn't actually go to a film, it goes to the infamous series The Idol, starring Lily Rose Depp and The Weeknd. If you haven't seen this series and are wondering, is it really that bad? Yes, it is. It's probably even worse than you expect it to be. First of all, regardless of the acting, nothing actually happens in this series. The Idol is created by Sam Levinson, the man behind Euphoria, which also has a lot of sex and drugs and cool shots, but back it up a good story with an interesting character development. None of that happens in The Idol. Nothing happens. It's the story of a singer who's stuck. She's trying to come up with her next big hit. Her team is breathing down her neck, and then she meets this creepy guru, a bit of a cult leader, and things don't improve for her from there. And this premise is dragged across 4 episodes. I actually haven't seen the 5th one yet, as it hasn't been released, but 90% of the plot is just Lily Rose Depp naked, dancing, having sex, or just walking around or crying, while the guru just mumbles at her some of the most cringe-worthy lines you could come up with. Do yourself a favour and just avoid it. And from worst to best, my favourite film of the month, and a film which is highly likely going to end up in my best films of 2023 list, is Rice Boy Sleeps. The absolutely beautiful, gut-wrenching, bittersweet story of a single mother and her little boy who moved from Korea to America, a story partially based on director Anthony Shim's personal life. The film follows both mother and child, their struggles over the years. For example, the boy at first doesn't want to be associated with his Korean heritage because he is bullied at school for his food, for his looks, for his names. The mother, for example, is asked to actually change her son's name to a more Western name. She is trying to make ends meet in a country in which she barely understands even what a doctor is trying to tell her at an appointment. And I love how it shows you how you grew up in that environment, how you grow to love your heritage. It's just beautiful. Moving on, actually one of the first films I watched this month was Hypnotic, starring Ben Affleck as an investigator who's looking into a series of mysterious events while also dealing with the disappearance of his own daughter. I'm just going to say about this film, don't watch it. It's not worth it. Instead, watch Kiyoshi Kurosawa's 1997 film Cure. Trust me, you'll thank me later. Next up, I watched How to Blow Up a Pipeline, a film about which I had read many positive reviews, so I had to check it out. Not having seen the trailer, the film was completely different from the documentary approach I was expecting from this film. It's a fictional story of a group of different people who for different reasons are attempted to sabotage an oil pipeline. This film is interesting because it shows both sides of the characters' decisions. For example, it poses the question of, is violence and property damage the proper solution? Are extreme acts ever justified? As well as all the different reasons people have for wanting this pipeline stopped. I then finally crossed off my watch list a film that had been on it since the beginning of time. Funny Games, not the original Austrian version, but the English language remake by the same director, starring Naomi Watts and Tim Roth. This film is pretty disturbing as it's a story of a perfectly normal and happy family who is visited by two young men, two teenagers, who basically take over the house and do anything really they can think of with the guests. I like this film because it doesn't hold back. It doesn't satisfy you with the usual safe cliches, and also the way the violence is depicted and the way the characters speak is very realistic and so very frightening. Also on my watch list for a very long time was Christine, starring Rebecca Hall as Christine Chubbuck, a woman who in the 70s shocked the world in a way I will not reveal to not spoil the film or the story if you haven't seen it yet. The film is pretty tough, and I think it did a great job at conveying the hidden struggles some people go through, trying to please others and never managing, trying to keep up with work and family and friends, if there are any, until you reach a breaking point. I then watched Reality, starring Sydney Sweeney as reality winner, a real life woman who was questioned by the FBI regarding the leaking of confidential classified military information. The film is basically a word-by-word reenactment of the FBI's interrogation, including moments in which information is redacted, pauses, awkward moments, and it slowly unravels the whole story. I wouldn't say this film is an absolute masterpiece, but it is pretty interesting, also the way the whole story was conveyed, and I didn't know anything about this woman before watching the film. Instead, a tremendously underwhelming film I watched this month was Fool's Paradise, a comedy which just isn't funny, regardless of all the big names that are in it. The premise actually sounds quite funny. A famous actor is replaced by a random man who looks like him to complete some projects he had underway, and he eventually turns out to be even more popular than him. The problem is that due to psychological trauma, he doesn't speak. And all of this interesting premise, all the possible comedic outcomes, the Hollywood satire was reduced to some of the most boring and predictable jokes and setups. But I'm going to leave it up to you to form your own opinion, as I've read very split reviews of it. In June, I also watched some of the Hostel films, specifically number 2 and number 3. I had to watch them for work, so I haven't seen number 1, but I will have to, as apparently 2 and 3 are the worst of the trilogy. The Hostel films are basically a gorier and much more poorly written version of the Saw movies, in which it's just one torture after the other. The Saw movies actually have a pretty captivating storyline amongst the tortures, is that the Hostel movies are mostly tortures punctured by boobs and screaming. But let's admit it, we do have to credit them for creativity. Creativity to the point that maybe somebody was getting a little too creative and needs a bit of therapy. Basically, the villains are a group of criminals who abduct tourists to then perform everything possible on them. I'll leave it like that. I don't think I actually watched that many horrors this month. The only other bloody film I watched was Blade, a 90s superhero film about a man who has vampire powers and uses them to track down and kill vampires. The reason why I wanted to watch this film is because there is a remake supposedly in the works starring Mahershala Ali as the protagonist. Fans were disappointed that Wesley Snipes will not reprise the role, but there is a 30-year gap, so it wouldn't be feasible, and at the bare minimum they will give him a cameo in the film, if not a standalone secondary character. Anyway, I like watching these standalone superhero films that don't require you to watch the 25 previous chapters, and this movie really fits the word cool. The opening bloodbath, the lines, the outfits, the choreography, everything really is just cool. Speaking of vampires, you know what's coming. Yes, I yet again rewatched Twilight. As you know, I rewatch it nearly every month. I actually watch it twice this month, as I rewatched the whole saga, the whole 5 films from beginning to end. Twilight is a very hyper-romantic and incredibly unrealistic story of a vampire and a human who fall in love, with all the complications that come with that. I then watched Sanctuary, a film featuring basically only 2 actors, Christopher Abbott and Margaret Qualley, who, without spoilers, are a dominatrix and her client. But their game soon evolves into something bigger as they start discussing a relationship, work, personal life, and much more, and things get out of hand. This film isn't terrible, but Margaret Qualley's acting in some points felt a little forced, exaggerated, and I'm not speaking about the dominatrix scenes. And when you only have two characters and nobody else, something like that really stands out. Another sex-heavy film I watched, but with a completely different premise, is Lars von Trier's Antichrist. I've seen quite a few of Lars von Trier's films, and this is the most von Trier he's ever got. Basically, a couple are dealing with grief, they go through the different stages, and they're trying to get through it on their own, while maybe a professional would have been handy, as it's quite obvious there's a lot going on, including a lot of supposedly therapeutic but violent sex, odd scenes in the woods. Lars von Trier as typical Lars von Trier. Anyway, I then watched two films which follow a common theme, The Covenant and Thank You for Your Service, which both cover the topic of people being fucked by the military. The Covenant does it in a more hoo-ha manner. It stars Jake Gyllenhaal as a sergeant stationed in Afghanistan who hires a local interpreter to help him and his soldiers in their missions. The film is based on the real-life hiring of tens of thousands of interpreters who offer their services and their lives to the US military, with the promise of then being granted visas and green cards for the United States. But things are often easily said and not done. Anyway, as I was mentioning, The Covenant mostly takes a mature approach to the topic and is more about the actual warfare. The sergeant and his interpreter end up stuck in some pretty sticky situations and have to figure out how to get both of themselves out alive. Instead, the other film, Thank You for Your Service, is more of a psychological drama about the soldiers who are fucked by the military after returning home from war, after being assured that they would be set for life. The protagonist is portrayed by Miles Teller, who returns home with his fellow soldiers and friends, and they're all dealing with PTSD, physical injuries, hallucinations, and they receive basically little to no help with settling back in civilian life. If you're interested in this topic, you might also like Jennifer Lawrence's last movie, Causeway. I then watched an older film, But I'm a Cheerleader, starring a very young Natasha Lyonne as a teenager who is sent by her parents to a gay conversion camp, but instead of doing her any good, she gets into a lot of trouble, and altogether it's a super fun teen comedy. I really wish I'd seen this when I was a teenager. Another film which covers religion and teenage girls, but in a completely different context, is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, a title which I always struggle to remember correctly. This film isn't really my thing. I prefer my teenage comedies to be more similar to But I'm a Cheerleader, but this film is still absolutely great at nailing all the small idiotic paranoias all girls go through, all the questions and doubts about periods and boobs and kissing and things which make no sense when you grow up. A great film I watched this month is Calm with Horses, one of Barry Keoghan's lesser known titles, but in which he is still absolutely great. The film centres around a criminal group, a criminal family in Ireland, and the struggles one of the members is going through both in his personal family life and in keeping up with what the gang expects from him. Then, except for Spider-Man, I watched barely any animation this month. I watched Luca, the Disney Pixar film set here in Italy, and I must say that although with a lot of stereotypes, the film nailed a lot of perfect Italian sentences and a pretty good pronunciation. The film centres around a sea creature monster boy who explores the land above water with his friends. And if you want to see places similar to the film set in Italy, in the area of Genova, there are some pretty idyllic locations, but Italy isn't all like that. Here we can only just dream of waking up with a view like that. I did watch another animated film, but it was a super short film, Amusement Park by Shintaro Kago, who by a quick research seems to be specialised in this absurdist style of short films. Amusement Park is pretty weird. It features a girl who is hit in a Final Destination style by a truck and ends up being injured in a creative manner. It feels a lot as if someone just let their intrusive thoughts and creativity to take over the page. I'm going to insert here other two short films I watched this month. One is Possibly in Michigan, a 1983 short film which possibly is one of the weirdest things I watched this month. It's a musical horror movie about a cannibal who stalks women at a shopping mall and beyond. It's incredibly surreal with nonsensical imagery, lines, editing, but it's one of those cult titles you just have to watch. The other short film I watched is 100% Beef, which takes the term short film quite literally, as it's 1 minute long, and it stars Daisy Ridley in 2013 when she was basically unknown. But don't worry, you're not missing out on anything, as she just eats a gross bowl of pasta and says... Apparently it was for a competition in which filmmakers had to create a horror story using only 4 shots. The oldest film on today's list is Cairo Station, a 1958 Egyptian film which has quite a big cultural significance, as it covers many progressive topics for the time, like sexual repression, violence, struggles of the working class, all which Egyptian cinema couldn't do just a handful of years later with the nationalization of their film industry. As the title implies, Cairo Station is set in Cairo train station and follows the different characters who work, live, transit there, and how their stories come together, often not in the happiest of ways. Another older film I watched is All the President's Men, starring a very young Dustin Hoffman. The film follows the Watergate scandal in the early 70s, and in particular 2 journalists, Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford, investigating the case and reported for the Washington Post. At first this film feels a little frustrating, as everything is very vague, implied. The journalists struggle to actually get a proper statement out of people. They just say things like, follow the money. But as the plot evolves, it is clear that that was actually how the events were first uncovered. I then watched Burn After Reading, a very famous film by the Coen brothers, starring basically everybody you could possibly think of, but which I had just never watched. This film is pretty funny. It's the story of 3 different groups of people, and when I say different, I mean ranging from CIA analysts to gym employees, whose lives end up connecting when the disc with classified information ends up in the wrong hands. I then watched Margin Call, which is set in the early stages of the 2008 financial crisis and follows the employees of an investment bank who spot the first signs of an impending total financial catastrophe. The acting in this film is pretty good. It stars Kevin Spacey, who always confirms how great of an actor he is. But I'm not going to lie, I really struggled with keeping up with the technical jargon, like what was actually going on, what the employees actually discovered. I also watched Son of the South, which is supposed to be a touching, inspiring, moving story of people coming together against racism, and which ended up being extremely underwhelming and with very poor acting. Not that I was expecting Lucy Hale to suddenly pull a Meryl Streep in this. Briefly summed up, a white student gets closer to his local black community, at first for some school research papers, and then because he feels involved in their struggles and finds out what some people are unfortunately capable of committing. I only watched 1 documentary this month, Arnold, in which Arnold Schwarzenegger recounts his life story from his early years in Austria all the way to the plans for his future legacy. I think many people just associate him with muscles, whereas this documentary shows what a long road he had to cover to get where he is now and the personal struggles which led him to who he is now. I also find it hilarious how Schwarzenegger and Stallone always seem to be in this eternal competition. Arnold releases the documentary Arnold on Netflix. 1 month later, Sly announces the documentary Sly on Netflix, which basically seems to be created in the same identical manner. Then right at the end of the month, I watched Omar, a Palestinian film about a young baker who nearly every day climbs the West Bank barrier in order to reach his lover, to reach his friends, with whom he plans on carrying out attacks on the Israeli military. And the situation soon gets pretty grim for our protagonist. This movie is interesting also from a film industry point of view, as the cinema of Palestine has faced many struggles. For example, many older films have disappeared, and at the moment it is very hard to actually make a film, as it has to be approved following some ridiculously strict guidelines. So it's always interesting when we get to actually watch a film. But with that, we have reached the end of today's list, and now I would love to hear what you've been watching, what you loved, what you hated, what you think about these titles I talked about today. Let me know everything with a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.